Welcome to Rabble Rants. I'm Santiago Helou Quintero, and alongside Jessa McLean, we're going to unpack the stories that have us most riled up and challenge the narratives around them.
All right, so welcome to another Rabble Rants. This isn't the first time we are going to be talking about anti-immigration narratives, but it feels like it's hit an extra fever pitch. And so we absolutely need to address this because overall, hopefully everybody listening understands that all of these narratives have one thing in mind, and that is to divide the working class so that we do not see ourselves as one powerful unit, but as a collection of marginalized groups, eking out our own existence. And that is just to play into capital's hand. And so we're here to kind of unpack some of the narratives that have been going around, but some of these narratives are turning into really damaging policies that are going to have real impacts on a lot of people's lives. The federal Liberals announced on October 24th that they were going to do more cuts to immigration. This time, they were limits put on permanent residents. So these will be caps on people that can achieve permanent residency here. That's going to go down to 365,000 people by 2027. And so this is on top of the extra regulations put on international students that we'll touch on a little bit, and the limitations put on temporary foreign workers that the Liberals have done this year. And so as a whole, after all of these changes, the Migrant Rights Network estimates that 1.2 million people that are working and living in Canada will see their permits expire and have no pathway to permanent residency. And this is despite promises from the Trudeau government repeatedly promising that they would continue to roll out status for all.
This is just another really frustrating example of something that we've been talking about for a very long time on this show. We've been warning about, we've been seeing the warning signs, right? And as we've been talking about it, the Liberal government has for a long time continued its promises that it will introduce something like status for all without actually making any steps towards actually doing so. And they've been feeling the pressure of the Conservatives becoming more powerful, looking like they're going to take the next federal election. And they've started backtracking and trying to appease to the Conservative audience. And that's really the reason that they're doing it, because they know that they know that immigrants aren't the problem. They know that they're not causing these problems because they know that they rely on the exploitation of temporary foreign workers and of immigrants of all kinds in order to keep the economy afloat, right? Large parts of our economy are built on this. Our education systems are literally paid for more by international students than by our own governments. They know that they need them, but it's become the popular scapegoat, as it always does. I mean, it's such a lazy scapegoat too. Like, it's such a textbook scapegoat. Our answer is not to continue exploiting international students or temporary foreign workers. Like, our argument isn't let's keep them so that we can keep exploiting them because we need to keep exploiting them. I mean, the government does need to keep exploiting them in order to keep things going. But if we were to actually introduce status for all, if we were to give people all of the rights and resources that Canadians are entitled to, they will thrive and they will do better and the economy will do better. We're being held back by exploiting people, by creating a second-class citizenship, something in which the United Nations has called a modern-day form of slavery. And they've called it that for well over a decade. Like, this has been known for well over a decade.
That's what makes it tricky for leftists, too, because we see these programs around international students, knowing they pay 3 times the tuition. They're being exploited for their labor. They pay up to 10 to 21% more rent than a someone born here in Canada. And so you look at these systems, and most of the time we're like, no, this is an exploitive system. It shouldn't exist. And that's where it's really important, I think, to keep stressing status for all. There's so much work being done by the Migrant Rights Network and other migrant groups. Well, and it's been adopted by, your mainstream NGOs as well. It's not a far off idea, and it was promised to them. It is the answer. Absolutely. We need those workers. Our economy has always been based on immigration, our labor economy. We have always based those quotas and whatnot. A lot of it has been very, very racist, but the numbers go up and down based on our labor needs. But this time, like Santiago said, you're seeing the Liberal government even go against any kind of economical sense in this regard. I mean, it is completely placating to a false narrative and it's like the chicken and the egg. I'm not sure what comes first, right? You say it's conservative ideology, but then you see polls that say, 75% of Canadians think that immigrants are a strain on the housing market. And, almost 60% think we take in too many immigrants. So then you're like, oh, that's the public narrative. But then that's largely fed into by the media and these policies that are coming out. I want to go to that video that folks may have seen circulating on Twitter and whatnot. It's a young gentleman, Ashwin Anamalai, in Waterloo, Kitchener-Waterloo area. And he's being accosted by an older woman. And she is just laying into with this like anti-immigrant stuff. I mean, we've seen it before. We know that exists. I think people are becoming a lot more blatant and empowered by this. But I mean, this is not new. Racialized people will tell you this is not a new experience. But the way she even lays in and says, there's too many students here. This fucking lady, I doubt most people understand, or before this, just how many international students that we have, or what they pay, or what their experience is like. They are parroting narratives that they have seen repeated in the news. This isn't an issue that is near and dear to people's hearts, like how many international students we take in. I mean, it should be, but it's really not. But this woman had it ready. It was a firing. Like, she just had all of these lines ready to throw at him that she had been fed, right? Like, you have people that are struggling. They're very angry. And then we have even the most liberal politicians feeding them this thing that says immigrants are to blame. And with all the fucking fields that we're losing ground on, this one seems to be very rapid. And I'm not just imagining it, because the Toronto Star posted results from a poll that, I mentioned it was almost 60% of Canadians think we let in too many immigrants. I already said that. But just last year, that was only 44% of people. And the year before that, it was only 27% of people. So we're not imagining this ratcheting up of this anti-immigrant rhetoric. And like people, 1.2 million people will either need to go and continue to live here because they built community around them. They probably have families here. They work here, and they'll have to be undocumented, or they'll have to leave, or, even maybe they can get temporary status. This bullshit conservative claim that they'll be able to get refugee status. Are you fucking kidding me? Even the refugee systems that we have in place, the visa systems in place to rescue people from Sudan and from Gaza, nobody's coming in on them. This Liberal government is no friend to refugees either. That will not be the solution for all of these people. And if you look at it from a capital point of view, because it's not liberal conservative, it's always capital's interest. Capital loves undocumented people. They love undocumented people. They don't have to give them shit in terms of services. Because even we see people with restricted immigration status, they're not permanent residents. We're seeing them denied for services already. Temporary workers, they pay into tax, but they don't get it. They don't get OHIP. They don't get provincial health care. International students, they pay 3 times the tuition, but they can't go to their local food bank. Right? That's not new, but there's, a recent story, fucking Six Buzz is the one that highlights it. Like, does it have to be these people? But they, post up around a Vancouver food bank that is limiting first-year students. And you know why they're coming up with this very specific policy about limiting first-year students is because the Liberals have raised the expectation or the requirements for international students. So they used to have to prove that they had access to $10,000 in order to come here. You know, feeds into the old, you're not going to come over here and milk off our services that we don't provide anyway. But that's besides the point. So it used to be $10,000. And now it's twice that. They have to have access to $20,000, 635. But Santiago, here's the fucking kicker on that one. They will continue to adjust this number based on the cost of living. There's no other social service that makes those adjustments. We've been dying trying to get them to raise ODSP and all of the things based on cost of living, and very few of them are, but they will make sure that international students, if inflation is high, will continue to need more and more money just to come over here in order to pay 3 times the tuition. And when Santiago said these universities rely on international students, I need you folks to understand just how much. I mean, even in Alberta, where they never reach their cap of international students, so this restriction actually won't impact most provinces because they don't reach their cap yet. But even in those circumstances with lower populations, it's still 23% of the revenue for the University of Calgary, for example. 23% of the revenue that university takes in strictly comes from international students.
Yeah, I mean, the Ontario colleges are funded over 50%. Well, they're funded more by international students than they are by the government of Ontario.
Well, that's where this came from. That's where this little economy came from. You have them forming, their own, councils. But it's a $50 billion industry in Canada that was completely created in the absence of adequate provincial funding for post-secondary education. All the universities and colleges were absolutely struggling to make ends meet and not increase tuitions to, unreachable amounts. And so they needed to look for alternative revenue sources. And, you can only charge so much for parking and for food and for all the things they tried to charge students for. They needed to bring in a new revenue stream, and that was international students. And the federal government does not mention what some of these provinces are supposed to do. I mean, I have an answer. They should be fully funding post-secondary schools. But these are conservative governments that we're talking about. That's not what's going to happen. So what is going to happen when you don't have, half of your revenue source? Well, we're seeing campuses like Seneca Polytechnic is closing. We're 2 weeks into these changes or something like that, and already schools are folding. This will not be the first, especially in Ontario. We have completely centered. A lot of the educational institutions are going to be in big, big trouble. And we know from all of our experience that when businesses are in trouble, we end up paying more because the government is not going to bail them out.
And real quick, it's not just like these international students just showed up here because there are so many people dying to study in Canada, right? This was a very intentional, we went and we recruited international students from around the world, particularly in places like India. We have recruiters who are selling them lies, telling them that, hey, if you study this program, you're going to be able to build a life in Canada. It's such a guarantee that you can bet the family farm on it. You should literally sell your family farm to fund students being able to go do this because they'll be able to then send money back and provide a life for their families or bring their families over, This is not like people are just trying to join part of what Canada is. No, we have actively recruited. And now we are backtracking on it and breaking all of those promises. People want to paint the international students as the villains, but won't talk about all of the people who are actually responsible for this, right? And then when we talk about all this fear mongering around population growth, I find it quite ironic because there's so many right wingers who are also talking about how we're facing societal collapse because the birth rate is too low, which really exposes like the underlying racism behind all of this, because they're not scared that the population is growing too quickly. They're scared that it's not enough white people and that they're going to be replaced.
I want to talk about that for a minute, because at Thanksgiving this year, I saw that firsthand in my family. So I have a family member who's moving out of Brampton, and the reasons for them moving out there are nothing but xenophobic, honestly. Now, they claim that there's been an increase in crime and, maybe there's more appeal for some other features. But largely, it was the demographic shift that dominated the conversation. And I was astonished at some of the things that bothered them. I mean, if you genuinely thought that this group of people brought more crime, I mean, I can have a conversation with you. We can try to explore how that's not accurate and how immigrants tend to have fewer charges. It's an ugly narrative and it's bullshit. But it was things like Santiago said, like being replaced. They didn't say that. You can't say that. I mean, maybe in some circles you can say that and people won't give you the side eye or beat you down. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think my family would know that, like, that's not acceptable in my presence. But it was things like my aunt complaining that when she goes to the produce department, there are now fruits and vegetables she didn't recognize. Okay, so there were more fruits and vegetables available to her to choose from. There was no comment on the price or the absence of, the carrots and the potatoes and all the other things that she feels familiar with. It was just the presence of unfamiliar fruit that started to make her feel like she wasn't in her own neighborhood anymore. And you can feel that colonial upbringing that we all have, that settler mentality that's been ingrained in us that we don't realize. And they're sitting there, they know it. They must know that these are racist comments, but they're trying to couch them in other things. But it really was astonishing to me to witness that, because I wouldn't describe my family as like overtly racist. You have the odd people in the family that make comments, and I think every white family is going to have those people for sure, but these were folks that I expected better from, and it was hard to hear. And I challenged it, it was like, so there's more diversity in your fruit and vegetables. And they had no response to it, because there is no logical response to it. You need to reply that you're racist, right? That can be your only fucking answer, and you don't want to say that. They try to find different ways to justify, like they're going to go to housing, right? We're in a housing crisis, right? I'm using scare quotes because it's not a housing crisis. It's a condition created by capital in order to extract maximum wealth from property. However, folks recognize what I'm talking about when I say housing crisis. And so without any other explanation, folks are not just scapegoating them for, I don't know. What do they think international students are being a detriment to? Have they seen the housing that's available to international students? But yeah, I'll link back an episode. I mean, we did an entire episode that really debunks the housing versus immigration narrative. But people aren't buying it. I mean, like I said, 75% of people think immigration puts a strain on housing.
Yeah, that food thing really, like as an avid foodie myself, like, are you kidding me? We gonna act like Canadians don't love international cuisine? Because we don't have a culinary identity of our own. We have made no effort to have our own culinary identity whatsoever. Our culinary identity is international cuisine.
Butter tarts and baked beans, man. Like, that's the only Canadian poutine.
But like the thing is, we can bring it back to the English roots, and even the English roots in culinary are invading other countries because they like their spices so much.
But we've all been told we own this, right? We're colonial settlers. These are ours now. That's not how it works, Santiago. You don't give credit to the folks you steal shit from. You don't do that. All right. So they see all these dishes they eat. Like
I just can't imagine the mindset, because like me, I go to a grocery store, I see a new vegetable that I've never seen before, and I'm like, ooh, what can I do with this? You know? Like there are things that I'm from a country that has so many more variety of fruits and vegetables that like I don't need, like it's almost overwhelming. And here I'm constantly like, oh, I wish we could have the variety of fruits and vegetables that we have in Colombia. And someone's out here seeing that as a problem. Like that just really shows like the brain rot that comes from this mentality, you know?
But that's your privilege, Santiago. You don't experience white fragility the way we do. Okay? I need you guys to understand how fragile the white ego is.
That's just really the thing, right? Like we dissect this. And like that's I don't want to intellectualize this too much in a way. Like I don't want to come here and break down numbers and do advanced mathematics, right? Because like it really just is basic. Because at the most basic dissection of their arguments, it comes back to racism. There is no advanced economical things going on here whatsoever, right? Like we're talking about, we live in the second largest country by landmass in the world, a country that has like in terms of natural resources, who has as much natural resources as we do? We have all the natural resources, and what we don't have, we're quite good at going and taking from other people, because we also have the most mining companies, right? So a wealth of natural resources here.
Oh, but we can't build homes to keep up with 3.9% population growth.
And that's the thing. We have a tiny population. I come from Colombia, a country where all of our cities are built in the mountains or around mountains, where we have all of these geographical barriers that make building housing difficult. And nevertheless, my home city is multiple times bigger than our largest city, right? Like when I hear these arguments, it just sounds so ridiculous to me. It is so easy for us to accommodate a larger population. And if you just how about we bring in construction workers and we build housing like no one's business? It's like, my home city of Bogota used to be houses too. It used to be a bit like Toronto. It used to be mostly houses. You know what they did? They turned those houses into buildings. And I'm just gonna throw in a little and then the bike lane argument with it too. Like we got bike lanes everywhere.
Well, those will be relics, but
just it's all of these arguments that are just nothing more than cultural, is what it comes down to. They're scared of cultural change because economically there is no logic to it, none at all.
No, this will have bad economic impact for folks that are super concerned about that. This is vote buying by the liberals, and it's the most dangerous form of vote buy. Please just send me another carbon tax. Just send me another carbon tax check. Do you really need to scapegoat people, marginalized people, in order to make sure you win the next election? You say build houses, we can build the houses. We can, but right now we've put all that building into the hands of developers. Those are the people we should be scapegoating for issues with housing. It's unbelievable that we still think we can incentivize capitalists who can make far more money doing what they're doing, because they're getting even better at it. They're using AI now to rack up more rent. It's non-market housing that we need politicians to build. We need our government to build. I mean, Toronto did build. Ricardo Tranjan, shout out to Ricardo Tranjan again. We were kind of talking about you even before we hit record. We had him on to talk about his book, The Tenant Class. I will definitely link that episode in the show notes. You need to listen to it. But he breaks down that myth of, it's a housing crisis and how it's manufactured. And he is getting a lot of page time, print space in the Toronto Star. It's definitely not his first op-ed, but I'll link his most recent, where he goes right after this point, that not developers you should be looking to. Why you would look to the class that is designed to maximize their profits out of shelter to fix the housing crisis is asinine. And you know, when he tells you so, you feel stupid for ever thinking that the solutions lay in those policies where, you know, tax breaks for them or make it easier or, you know, make negotiations with developers to include quote unquote affordable housing. And, you know, none of that is working clearly, but it's not working by design. But instead, politicians are just worried about what election day results are going to be. And they're seeing this anti-immigration feelings pouring out in the public now, right? Because Trump has been around and all of that nonsense that surrounds that circus of the US election is so racially charged at times, right? And we had the riots in the UK not that long ago that were very specifically targeted to immigrants. And I think I've just noticed my social media feed even more full of kind of just like your middle ground Canadians, like not hard right, just spewing this anti-immigration shit. You know, like people are really upset about folks catching salmon with nets in the GTA. And we're like on a mission to film and out these people, but always with the stressor that they weren't white. You know, they assume they were immigrants. We don't fucking know. They didn't talk to these people. And like it matters, they were people. People are people. But that was the thing. That was like, or finding any kind of non-white person doing something that you wouldn't socially condone, I suppose, and just blowing that up as though it was proof that they don't belong here or that they're a different kind of people. And that is such a wicked, wicked tool for the capitalist class, for us to start looking at each other like that. It is so incredibly dangerous. It plays right into their hands. And I thought, we're a little more cognizant of that at this time, you know? But I don't want anyone giving an inch to any of those policies, honestly. There is no change in immigration that developers will allow to relieve the housing strategy. They are on a mission. We have an entire playlist on Blueprints of Disruption, tenant power, and the tactics that some of the landlords and developers are employing to do this, and the circles they run in with our politicians. They wine and dine with them and lobby them like crazy. Like they're prepared for these numbers to change. And like I said, there'll be some provinces, like Alberta, most provinces won't even see much of a change in the amount of international students, for example. And so that won't relieve the housing crisis at all. This is like a short-term play for the next election. I wonder how Liberal supporters feel about this, these bleeding heart Liberals. Are they feeding into this or are they damaging their base? Because it seems like every fucking politician's playbook now is to placate the right. You know, you've got even Kamala going around with the Cheney family like it's some sort of achievement that she's managed to get an endorsement from the daughter of one of the worst war criminals we've ever seen. And, you know, that can be really disheartening for folks that do the work that we do, to see this ground fall and to see their narratives prioritize politicians instead of ours. And I think sometimes that lays in the faith that some people still have in electoral politics, I believe. But I think that's another episode to unpack that. But I'm really disheartened to see this racist shit. It's not just anti-immigrant. It's not just xenophobia that we're talking about. Like, that's what these policies are aimed at. But they are explicitly racist. And our immigration policies always have been, to be honest. Like, they always have been. We have a horrible history of this. Just watching it play out on on individuals. Like, surely there's a lot of folks out there, you are going to know somebody that's going to be impacted. Like 1.2 million people. That's a lot of people with a lot of family. And to just wave this off like it's just some strategy, I think it's just so sickening by the Liberals. But I don't think anyone could be surprised by their callousness at this point.
Yeah, no, and like knowing in terms of knowing people like who are impacted, like having just gone through post-secondary education, the amount of international students who I talked to about this, it's just it's so deeply unfair to them. You know, like they're trying really hard here, just like everyone is to try. Like it's already hard to be a young person right now, you know. It's hard to find good work. It's hard to keep your head above the water. It's so much harder when you're an international student and your ability to keep your head above the water is tied to whether or not you're ever going to be able to get that permanent resident status. And you know, having just had a friend have their status expire, get sent back to Colombia. Like I just went through years with them trying to find ways to within the system be able to stay within the system, and they were working 6 days a week. You know, they were working as hard as they could, and they built a family here. What makes them less Canadian than any of us, you know? And this isn't, it's also not just going to end with immigrants, right? Once the smoke clears and the economy is still fucked and everything is still struggling, they're going to have to find more advanced ways to scapegoat and to blame people. And like, we've seen this all before. You know, we've played this game before. We know how it ends.
Yeah, not well.
I'm getting really tired of like predicting these things on here, on this microphone, on this podcast, and watching them happen.
They're not the I told you so's you wanna talk about. I mean, one of the real, I know like capital's always the real villain, but the one person that really pisses me off in all of this is Minister Mark Miller. I mean, he was the housing minister and started the scapegoating then. They made him immigration minister, and it's only gotten so much worse. You know, if we're going to put a face to these really bad policies, I think it would be him, especially as a liberal. It's tough. We always talk about, you know, what's going wrong, and it's hard to sometimes figure out how to move forward. So let's get to calls to action. Longtime listeners might remember the Najuan Support Network. We interviewed them. They are non-unionized workers organizing themselves against bad bosses, but they have become so much more than that. And one of their main focuses right now is on the plight of international students. And they have an encampment in Brampton that folks may not know about, so we're going to tell you. They encourage people to come by. It's just off the 410 in Brampton at 295 Queen Street East. Especially in the evenings after 7 p.m., they tend to rally around that time. They've had a few marches and rallies there. They've gotten incredible union support, considering, you know, they're non-union workers, so it's nice to see that solidarity. They have a legal fund that folks can donate to, and they're all over social media, so we will link folks to them. Again, that's in Brampton, Ontario, but also across Canada is the Migrant Rights Network. They do incredible work and have been for a very long time. And in fact, they were created out of the labor movement of sorts in an attempt to thwart what we are seeing happening right now. You know, this has been in the works for many, many years. I talked about the increase of, you know, bad immigration attitudes over the years. And in an attempt to make sure the working class didn't get divided, the Migrant Rights Network has been asserting like the most progressive changes for migrant rights, you know, and status for all is what they're working on right now. They really do see it as not like the solution, because, you know, an end to capitalism would be the solution, but a real kind of blanket fix for a lot of the questions surrounding like, what do we do? What do we do about international students being exploited for their labor? Well, we bring them under the labor code so they can at least be exploited only as fairly as we are and not more so, right? We make sure they have access to healthcare and that nobody bans them from food banks or from shelters should they need it. There's things that we can do, and status provides you with that, right? It doesn't end up a whole lot of little fights, right? Sanctuary cities you wouldn't need those anymore. Everyone would have status. You wouldn't need to be advocating food bank by food bank or university by university to, better provide and teach them their rights around labor so they're not exploited in the housing market as well, because they'll have status. We've talked about it before. Without status, people are so precarious. Their living situation is precarious. They don't know if they can go to the police. They don't have access to health care. They don't want to push up against the system, even in the ways that are being provided for them, because the greasy wheel doesn't get the oil when you're a migrant worker. You go home. So to put more and more people into that very precarious situation is going to be bad for all of our communities, whether or not you see them as part of your community or not. But they are. So again, always check our show notes for the calls to action. I will link both the Nudge One Support Network and the Migrant Rights Network. We'll try to get them into the studio again as well so they can talk about the work that they're doing. But there is avenues to push on this. But, for the settlers out there that are hearing that same shit within their families that I heard, you can start there. You can push back there. But ultimately, yeah, it's when the leftists and the progressives feed into it, even a little bit. And so I encourage you to hook up with the folks that are doing the organizing, and they are pushing hard, like unapologetically hard for exactly what's needed and not maybe what's popular at the moment.
Yeah, calls for action here are difficult because this takes a lot of work. Migrant rights networks have been working really hard on this issue for many years, and now we're backtracking, which makes it difficult. It is difficult. We need to be fighting this rhetoric wherever we see it, because it doesn't hold up. I'm even seeing people who were immigrants, who have been here for many decades, start to blame other immigrants for their problems.
Yeah, we call that pulling up the ladder behind you.
Yeah. And that's really frustrating,
Yeah, and I think that sucks because it happens when you're stuck in a hard place and you don't know how to get out. You need someone to blame other than, yourself, which, is not the culprit either. And it's just important that we keep focusing that ire, that anger at capital and the politicians who facilitate it.
Yeah. This is one of those issues that we have to fight the entire system in order to achieve change here. Right? Like, all the issues come back together, and it's connected to all of the issues that we're facing. And this will pass. There will be, like I said, it's not going to be a long-term efficient argument, because they're going to get rid of a lot of people, and then, oh no, who do we blame now, because the problems haven't magically solved? And then there's going to be another scapegoat, because there's always another scapegoat, right? So how about we just don't wait until that happens to learn these lessons? I guess that's really what I like. If I had to ask, it's that we don't wait to learn lessons. Let's learn the lessons now, and let's start taking action now. Let's not wait to take action.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to the producer of our show, Santiago, Helou, Quintero. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.